Jupiter for a Gemini Ascendant. We're going to start by considering the house Lordship of Jupiter. And Jupiter rules the 7th and the 10th houses. Now, we know that Jupiter by its very nature is an indication of a sense of happiness, fulfillment, and higher purpose. So whatever houses, generally speaking, Jupiter rules over, that ascendant's going to tend to consider that area of life represented by that house to be extremely important for their happiness and their well-being. So what does it mean that we have Jupiter ruling the 7th house? Well, this is one of the reasons why oftentimes Gemini ascendants have so many relationships or have so many friends, they're so good at business partnerships or partnerships in general. It's not just that they've got Mercury ruling the ascendant and they're good communicators and good managers. It means that there's a part of them that has this innate program that says, I'm probably going to be happier seeking fulfillment in other people, communication, interactions with other people. Jupiter rules over the 10th house, which deals with a sense of status, a sense of importance, and oftentimes the 10th house is related to career, although really the 10th house is called the Karma Bhava, which is the area of life that deals with the things that we get involved with and that we're known for, the karmas that we are engaged in the world. And for most people, that does relate to a sense of career. Now, that's very general. We always have to remember that. It's what we get engaged with most often. It doesn't always have to be our work. We look at things like the 2nd and 6th houses related to our day-to-day activities and how we generate our wealth, as well as the 10th. But it could be that the thing that we're most known for is not the thing that generates our wealth. It's possible. So we keep those things separate sometimes. But this is also why Gemini ascendants are very interested in being known and having status and being recognized within the world, because they think, since Jupiter rules over that 10th house, that that's where they're going to have their sense of fulfillment and happiness actualized. Just look around at some of the Geminis that seem to always be aiming for greater recognition. And sometimes if Jupiter isn't well placed and someone gets more recognition than them, then they get kind of grumpy, and then all kinds of difficult things happen. So Jupiter rules the 7th and the 10th house, and there is the very, very basic, not always accurate statement that a benefic ruling an angle loses some of its benefic influence. Usually that's true if it rules a more difficult house. The 7th and the 10th, they are angles. Benefic planets don't tend to work quite as well in an angle, because the angles are places of power and force, and benefic planets are generally planets of grace, which means they accept goodness. They don't necessarily go out and force it to happen. That's why malefics are often considered to be better in angles, because you put some grit, some Mars, and some Saturn in the 10th or 1st house or 7th house. That's an angle where there's power, and they use those planets to drive their life. So there's some subtle differences there, and usually malefic planets, crueler planets, do better if they also rule a trine along with an angle. So, but again, these are principles of yogas, which again, we don't cover these in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program until the very end of year 2, and there's a reason for that, because it's a little more complicated than just these really basic flippant rules. But what we're seeing here is with the Gemini ascendant, there's a strong emphasis towards a sense of happiness through relationships, partnerships, status, authority, because Jupiter rules the 7th and the 10th houses. Now, the better the dignity of Jupiter and the better situated Jupiter is by Vashtas or house placements, it may be that they do benefit from many relationships. They do benefit from prestige and authority and being very active in the world. But if Jupiter has difficulty, planets harming it, or it's in a difficult house, the 3rd, 6th, 8th, 12th, then that can show how a Gemini ascendant will tend to dissipate and waste their energy on these 7th and 10th house things. They'll get too caught up in the idealism of it, of thinking they're going to get happiness through it, but really it's not going to provide it. It's going to make them more egotistically driven if it's the 3rd house, make them suffer more if it's the 6th house, cause them too many breaks and changes which waste their energy and derail the consistent trajectory of their life if it's the 8th house. 12th house, just too many expenses, giving too much to relationships, giving too much time and attention to trying to have a career when really they need to be focused on some more important basic things in life, like having a healthy family or a healthy body or right action in the world, a healthy supportive career. So consider this when you're thinking about Jupiter related to Gemini. It's more of a neutral planet, although whether Jupiter is neutral or not, and whether they're wasting their time and their energy on these 7th and 10th house things or being supported by it depends on how Jupiter is situated within the chart. Now, when we think about Jupiter's exaltation, debilitation position, Jupiter is debilitated in the person's 8th house. If you're a Gemini ascendant, it's debilitated in the 8th house, which tells us that since Jupiter rules the 7th and the 10th, and it's debilitated in the 8th, now this is going to be true for all Geminis. It will be more true if the chart supports it, but since we're looking at the blueprint of Gemini, that tells us that the more a Gemini ascendant changes partners, changes business partners, jumps around from one relationship to the other, thinks they're going to find fulfillment in many different people. Again, that's the 8th house, sudden breaks and changes, making lots of changes consistently, suddenly. The more they're going to waste their time, their energy, and their happiness, and they're going to find themselves depleted and not have a great capacity for a relationship. The more often they keep jumping around in careers, 10th house because Jupiter rules the 10th, the more often they try to move, change, find something else to do with career, rather than trying to find a particular trajectory to stick to and hold the path. The more unhappy they will be, the less healthy they will be, and again, the more they will waste their vital resources, their vital energy, their vital life, and they'll become depleted. If we look at the fact that Jupiter is exalted in the 2nd house for a Gemini ascendant, what does that tell us? Well, one other thing about Jupiter debilitating the 8th is that the more often a Gemini ascendant tries to define their wealth and their resources or try to be supported by others too much, they try to rely too much on the wealth and resources of others, the more unhappy they will become, the more unhealthy they will become, because we have Jupiter, by its very nature, having debilitation in the 8th house of other people's resources, and also the house of longevity and vitality. So a Gemini ascendant, having Jupiter theoretically, ideally exalted, acting like it's exalted in the 2nd house, will show that a Gemini ascendant are meant to be self-made people. They're meant to focus on creating their own wealth. They're very skilled at that as well. They will find a lot of happiness and inner contentment the more they put their time and attention to managing their wealth and their resources and their family well, taking responsibility for their own wealth, their resources, and their family. That's like Jupiter being exalted in the 2nd house. Taking care of others, the 7th Lord being exalted in the 2nd house. The person is Gemini ascendant, the more they focus on taking care of the needs of others, the happier they will be. When we think about the 10th Lord exalted in the 2nd house, this is also why Gemini ascendants find a lot of fulfillment and joy and success through speaking, sharing knowledge, and sharing wisdom, because we have the 10th Lord ideally exalted in the 2nd house for a Gemini ascendant. So that is why Geminis can be very good, very profound, persuasive speakers and philosophers. But since it's Jupiter, we're not talking about Mars here, so this isn't someone who's meant to be drive it hard, motivational speaker. This is about someone who's meant to speak kind words, to bring people together, to speak soothingly, to soothe the differences in other people, to speak in such a way that people see how they share more things in common and are able to achieve greater goals as a group, as a community. So when a Gemini ascendant can tap into that wisdom, that expansiveness, that kindness, that grace of Jupiter and channel it through the second house, they will be fulfilling their role with Jupiter as a Gemini ascendant. And we've already talked about Mars, and Mars is debilitated in the second house. So that's a different kind of energy there. That's why when a Gemini ascendant gets all idealistic, aggressive, thinks that they can prove to others what the right way is, things just tend to go wrong, because that Mars energy, which is all about what we just discussed, that quality, is debilitated in the second house. Jupiter brings together. Mars motivates and drives it home. Mercury ruled Gemini ascendant is about bringing things and people and situations together through wisdom and philosophy and expansiveness. That's the key of Jupiter being exalted in the second house as it rules the 10th house. So keep these in mind when you consider the effects of Jupiter for a Gemini ascendant.